Morning Majority on 630 WMAL.
7:07 on WMAL. Morning Majority. Good Thursday morning to you. Brian Neiman, Cliff May in this morning, presidents of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Find more information at defenddemocracy.org. We've got Landy Davis coming up next hour. We'll talk with him at 8:06. Thomas Joslin, who specializes in counter-terrorism at FDD with Cliff, coming up at 8:36 this morning. Right now, we are joined by Mansoor Ijaz, chairman of Aquarius Global Partners, an American of Pakistani ancestry, counterterrorism analyst as well. Mr. Ijaz, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
I know that you've been, I read your piece, and you're very critical of Pakistan's government and the intelligence agency when it comes to Osama bin Laden hiding right underneath their noses. How much do you think that your thoughts on did they know that he was there, and how many people do you think knew his whereabouts?
Well, I think it's important to understand the architecture of how Pakistan as a country works. The Army and intelligence services are autonomous bodies that don't fall under the control of the civilian government as they do, for example, in the United States or in India or, countries that have proper and structural democracies in them. And because of that, what happens is because most of the life of Pakistan has been spent under army rule or under the control of the army in terms of the assets of the country, the physical assets of the country, they just don't allow the civilian leaders to know certain things. So there is no question. I think there's no American listening to this radio program or anywhere else in America today should believe for 1 second a word out of the Pakistani civilian side of the government or the military side that they did not know that bin Laden was there. They absolutely knew that he was there. My guess is, and I'm working now on a new op-ed piece in which I will lay out the evidence for that they not only knew he was there, but they actually constructed the terms of the deal on which he could stay. And it may be that he wasn't just in one place, that he was allowed to move around to 2 or 3 different places inside Pakistan. So, this Chinese wall that has been erected for many, many years between the civilian side of the government so they could go and tell the whole world whatever lies they wanted to with a straight face, and the military side of the house, which was doing whatever it wanted to serve its own dubious interest. That's basically the architecture that the American people have to understand about why this happened the way that it did.
Mansoor, this is Cliff May. There's a distinction between the ISI, the intelligence, the military, the civilian. Is it possible that, for example, the intelligence services, they knew where he was, but the military didn't, or the civilian didn't either? They were all kept in the dark, and just the ISI knew this?
Certainly the civilian did not know because they're never told these kinds of sensitive things. This is the way it was even back when the nuclear program was being developed, that the civilian side never knew what was going on. Excuse me. But when it comes to dealing with the Army, I would bet that there were certain people in military intelligence, because they have to liaison with the ISI at a very high level, that probably did know, but they probably did not inform Kayani, who was the Army Chief of Staff, so that he could, because anyone who had an interface, think of it this way, anyone who had an interface with the outside world, whether it's the Europeans, the Chinese, the Americans, whoever it might be, those people were kept in the dark simply because they could then say with a straight face, we did not know. But that doesn't mean that internally with these, because the ISI is basically infested with certain radical fundamentalist elements already, and the Army has them at the lower levels. They're not quite at the level where you would share this kind of information. But in the ISI, all the way to the very top, it's infected with Islamist fundamentalists all over the place.
Do you think it's possible that some of the information that we're getting from these computers and these flash drives may point to those people in the ISI who were helping bin Laden or helping al-Qaeda, and if we do get those names or that information, then what do we do with it?
Yeah. So that's a very, very intelligent question, and I think the answer is, I cannot sit here today and tell you whether we have that data or not, but I can tell you that the bulk of that data would have been about the network and the historical operations framework of what al-Qaeda has done up until now. So I think we're going to find out a lot about, for example, the insides of the 9/11 planning, the insides of the USS Cole attack, the attacks against the embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. Those kinds of things are what are most likely contained in the bulk of that hard drive, dissemination. I think it's unlikely. What I'd really like to know is who were the two telephone numbers that bin Laden relied on calling if he had to get out of the country. That's where we find out exactly what the complicity was. I don't think this is contained in the computer drives as much as it is in just those two telephone numbers and knowing who those people were in terms of who he was going to contact to get out. That'll tell you everything you need to know.
American relations with Pakistan is not just diplomat to diplomat, it's also military to military and intelligence service to intelligence service. I've got to figure there's going to be a lot more suspicion and a lot of awkward moments now between our intelligence officials who are there and theirs and our military officials and Pakistani military officials.
Well, let me comment on that by saying the following. Imagine that you have stealth helicopters that can get in under the radar in Pakistan. This compound was exactly 2 minutes away from one of the most heavily armed garrisons of the Pakistani army. It is not conceivable to me that our people got in, stayed on the ground for somewhere between 25 and 30 minutes, and got out without there being any possibility of the Pakistanis responding. So somebody had to know we were coming. I don't know who it was, at what level it happened, but somebody had to know that we were coming. If they did not, and we were able to get in like that, then you have to make the assumption as Pakistanis. If I was an ordinary Pakistani sitting there saying, oh my God, so that means basically the Indians can get in? Somebody could get in and attack our nuclear facilities? I mean, what kind of security? What are we paying for? Where did all the money go to try and provide security and safety for this country?
What about this theory, just as a possibility? That helicopters come in, somebody, maybe Kayani, the head of the military, somebody gets a phone call from the U.S., and on that phone call, the following is communicated. We are coming in. You do not want to interfere. Helicopters are not all we have. If you interfere, their consequences will not be pretty. Just keep your planes on the ground.
Yeah, it's a good theory. I think that it would have had to probably happen just as they were entering Pakistani airspace for that to be the case, in which case the question is, would somebody have alerted? My point is that then you have to go down a decision tree because there would have been enough time between the time that the helicopters entered Pakistani airspace and the time they got there, because that's not a 10-minute ride on the helicopter. It's a little longer than that. And so there was theoretically enough time for somebody to then warn bin Laden. So, the question is at what level the complicity was and for what purpose the complicity was. And that's the only point I'm trying to make here, that there's some inconsistencies and incongruencies with what we see as real data on the ground to be able to figure out what exactly is going on here. I think that the reality is Pakistan not only knew, but they were harboring him. They were giving him direct assistance to be able to stay where he was because they had a deal with him and God knows who else. And the question is now whether or not we are implicated in any way, shape, or form in that deal, whether we just decided this was the moment to go get him, whether there was an active process in place here to determine when the right time was to actually execute that kind of a plan.
Right.
It's interesting. A couple of years ago I was in Pakistan and raised the possibility that it was likely that Osama bin Laden was in Pakistani soil, and the number of Pakistanis who were insulted by my suggesting that.
I have to tell you, when I negotiated the ceasefire in Kashmir, one of the key guys that I worked with and relied on for communications with the hardest line of the militants was a fellow by the name of Khalid Khwaja. He was killed a couple of years ago in Pakistan because of his association with people like me in the outside world, and he was bin Laden's pilot during the Afghan jihad years. And I can tell you that maybe it was 3-4 years ago. This was still during the time when we were, before the election took place, when President Bush was still in power. And once he said to me, I asked him point blank, I was in Islamabad, I said, where is this guy? And he just smiled at me with a big grin, and he said, he might be a lot closer than you think. So now that rings in my ears all the time for the last couple of days, that he was trying to tell me that, and I never imagined that it would be that close.
Mansoor, great to have you on the program. We really appreciate your insights. We look forward to reading your next column with that evidence. Sounds great.
Very good.
Mansoor Ijaz,
take care.
counter-terrorism analyst here on